6:16 right now, and remembering a town on the Big Island destroyed by the 1946 tsunami. There's a new documentary airing on PBS Hawaii tonight that's all about keeping the spirit of Shinmachi alive. Joining us this morning with a preview of Shinmachi, Stronger Than a Tsunami, is the film's creator, Heather Fryer. Good morning, Heather. How are you doing this morning?
Good morning, Ross. Thank you, and thanks so much for having me.
Now, first off, what made you decide to make this documentary?
Oh my gosh, it was almost not a decision at all. I was actually a tourist in Hilo, and I went by Wailoa State Park, which, as anyone who knows Hilo knows, is a large, beautiful green space. But at that time, there was a little sign that said Site of Shinmachi, which I knew meant new town, but there was no town there. So I immediately became curious about what had been on that green space before. And asking a few people turned into a larger conversation. I met a gentleman named Kenneth Kamioka who introduced me to people who had actually grown up in that new town. And the more I heard about their stories of surviving this overwhelming tsunami when they didn't even know what a tsunami was at the time, but also the stories of how their families were resilient, neighborly, how they had survived the Great Depression and World War II. There was so much more to this green space, I found, than just the tidal wave that took it all away.
And Heather, what did you learn and take away from making this documentary?
So many things. One is to follow your curiosity because it can lead you to some really incredible stories. The other is that because Shinmachi formed itself as a business community, as a kumiai, as a place where people would prosper together and work together, that our community ties are really what make us resilient when disaster strikes. I often say before there was FEMA, there was Shinmachi, and it just came from the habit of people working together as neighbors toward everybody's prosperity and toward a better life for all of the children in Shinmachi. It was a very, very close-knit business community of families who just wanted alternatives beyond plantation labor, which is how many of those families arrived in Hawaii in the first place.
And Heather, after people watch this, what do you want them to take away from watching your documentary?
Well, one of those things is, I think, to really think about what being community-minded and community-spirited has to offer us in these difficult times that we're facing. I think that by looking out for one another, about thinking about the good of the whole, this is really how people survived something as devastating as a tsunami. The other thing is, I really want to encourage people to think about how in our own personal memories, our own small stories, there is history there. This documentary is really mostly just people who remember Shinmachi sitting together and sharing their stories and their memories. So if everybody were to go and ask an elder a simple question about what was your favorite food or where did you go to school, those histories are so alive and they connect us all. History is everywhere and we can all be historians.
Very well said, Heather. And it all started with your little visit and that little sign. Next thing you know, we have the documentary. Shinmachi, Stronger Than a Tsunami, airs tonight on PBS Hawaii at 9 p.m. Thank you very much, Heather. Appreciate your time and from your perspective.
Thank you, Ross.